across the pavement, hoping it'll cave in and swallow me whole. Wonder why my mind keeps on spinning. This is how I live into me, what so.
Um, they have the same ability to get to that state as everyone else, or is this something where we have to identify people at a young age that have that little bit of a uniqueness and then help foster it? I mean, the process to me seems very interesting. The path of how people go down this road of some deciding to completely reach higher states of consciousness and following a path of progression, and then others who don't. And I guess I'm curious if whether or not you think it's just catalysts within one's life or just individuals who are inherently different.
That's a great question. I feel like we all have huge missions and destinies if we choose them. I don't believe that one person is more gifted than another. I simply believe the gifts take different forms, and not everyone, unfortunately, uncovers the gifts they have. Or they might be too beholden to childhood traumas or adversities that they've gone through to truly allow themselves to shed that heaviness and step into the higher aspects of their being. However, I believe we're all capable to the same degree. It's just that one person might have an affinity for languages, someone else might have an affinity for numbers. And if we are left to our own devices and truly follow our own bliss, we'll awaken our gifts. And one of the things when I delivered my TEDx talk in 2011, I said, "Talent grown, not given." I feel like everyone is talented, but we don't give ourselves the opportunity to discover how truly talented we are.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I, of course, was not implying that someone is better than somewhere else at all. I just simply was noticing that some have those attributes at a young age where they're really, really in tune with an incredible imagination and all these things. And those, it seems like, and maybe this is a good progression for this conversation, but it seems like those individuals who do have this like immense love of the stars and imagination they're creating, and then maybe they're picked on by a lot of people, and or maybe they're excluded from a lot of groups where like those kids are want to go to sporting events and they want to feel cool, and those people are rejected. And it seems like it's a hierarchy system to conform people through this almost like bootleg boot camp type of school aspect. So that was what I wanted to ask you: is do you think that there is this a purposeful thing to conform and cause those unique individuals to just kind of forget about all those gifts and then conform, right? Conform with your mindset and your society. And if you don't, well, hey, you might be rejected and like eating lunch alone in the bathroom, like which was my case. But so what do you think about that? Is it a system to stamp that out? Because I mean, it really does not seem like it's encouraged from any point of view at all from the very beginning.
Yeah, I think here we're definitely beginning to tread on some different waters. For me, I would say it's institutionalized conformity. And I feel that a lot of the systems that govern our lives are designed to keep us in line, to keep us adhering to certain dictums and societal norms, because somebody who is a free thinker, who's a critical thinker, who is innovative and who champions their own self-expression above needing to belong or fit in doesn't make for a very good subject to rule over.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you want everybody to be obedient, then you can't have so many maverick free thinkers.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember in my own life, back in first grade in Houston, I was diagnosed with ADD, right? Attention deficit disorder. And it's something that I reflected upon years later, because I was like, wait a minute, but attention deficit disorder is essentially saying that you can't concentrate, you can't focus. And so you need these medications to help you focus. But the thing is, in areas that I was truly ignited by, like writing and drawing, and I could focus for hours. I was one of the most diligent students ever. And what I have learned to reconceptualize ADD as is you're just not willing to listen to boring stuff, like stuff that doesn't stimulate you, that doesn't awaken you, that you know is not aligned. You just can't do it. You know, your mind wanders off, you go off into your imagination. But the things that you do love, you can be extremely dedicated, extremely detailed and focused. And I think in many ways it's kind of medicated out of us. A lot of that creativity, a lot of that spark, that individuality is medicated out of us. And it's a sad reality. And thankfully my parents were able to see the shift in me, because I basically became this emotional numb automaton after 6 months. And my parents then stopped that medication and I started to come back into my personality, but it's a lesson I never forgot. And so I feel like, yeah, what you're saying about being ostracized or being rejected, not belonging, I mean, I definitely have that story. And now I know that you have that story. And I'm pretty sure a lot of the people who are listening also have that story. That's why we're drawn to this. We're the misfits who want to fit in with each other, right? Who don't have a place in traditional society because we're not traditional. We are here to be chain breakers and change makers.
That's very, very well said. And that's really the angle I was trying to get at, is that, yeah, everyone has incredible gifts of creating inside them, right? And those paths are all taking different directions, and some may not follow that path at all in this lifetime. Maybe that's meant for another one. But I want to focus on what you were just talking about, because I think this is a very critical and important area. And I think a lot of people, like you just said, fall into this same experience in life, because I do think that there are those who are just different from a young age. They're, like you said, they're lost in imagination. They're passionate about doing things they love, whether it's music, whether it's writing, whether it's archaeology, or like whatever it is. Like, they're passionate about what they love, and they get into this system of this conformed school system, which I think is an incredibly broken system of teaching. And there's so many things we could talk about in terms of how that just does not really work. But the core of that for me is this inherent feeling deep down inside. And I want to expand on that for a second. So I put up a post a few weeks ago that was just a little meme that said something like, I'm convinced now that those who had trouble, paraphrasing, but those who had trouble focusing in school are the ones who had like a different kind of mindset, who just inherently were rejecting this doctrine message. And I remember being in school, just like so many others, I imagine, and so many others that are listening to this, where they would be in school, they'd have this monotone teacher who doesn't care at all about teaching. They're just up there blabbing, saying all this stuff, and you're like falling asleep. You can't concentrate. You're like, what is this? I don't care. I don't want to just memorize this dribble. It was like for me. And so my grades really didn't reflect some of my intelligence, getting a lot of C's and B's, maybe if I was, B's if I was really trying to push a little bit extra. But that was my story. And it almost felt like all the ridicule and rejection from so many groups and even teachers at times, I kept constantly feeling like something was wrong with me. Like I was the problem in this whole thing. And look at everyone else all happy and in their little social groups discussing like what show they watched or whatever it was the other night before. And I always felt very alone, where I didn't want to have small talk. I wanted to talk about interesting things. I wanted someone to talk about geology or astrology or astronomy or history, like whatever it was. I felt like very alone. And I felt like I didn't really have a lot of those to talk to. And I didn't know if you shared those same experiences as well. And maybe you could just talk about how maybe one can maintain that, not give in, the path that unfolds. And maybe it does take breaks where you lose focus on that path of your imagination and potential, but you get it back again, right? At some point later on. So maybe you could just talk about that a little bit personally for you, and maybe give people that are listening a little bit of something to make them feel good about how difficult this path, the wandering path is.
Wow, there's so much that we could unpack there. First of all, yeah, I 100% agree with you. And it was like that for me. It was very lonely. I used to hang out, like my mother growing up was an English teacher. And that's probably, in no small part responsible for why I speak and write the way I do, coupled with a deep curiosity and passion for learning and expression. So I was constantly asking my mom, like, hey, here's a sentence I wrote, the boy was sad. How else can I say this? And she was like, well, you might want to consider saying the boy had melancholy feelings rising up inside of him. And I'm like, ooh, okay, that's good. And so I got into different modes of expression from a very young age. But what I used to do is I didn't really have many friends because I couldn't connect with the kids around me. So when you say, you're made to be a problem, or you are the problem, I can say you are a problem to a system that is dependent on your obedience. You are a big problem. And so I didn't really have many friends. I used to go and hang out with the teachers during my breaks, and I would chat to them because the other kids in school, I found I couldn't really relate to them so much. And teachers would say, like, if you don't stop talking in class, you're never going to amount to anything. You're never going to be successful. And ironically, talking is probably what I do the most, and it's probably responsible for the most success that I've had, is my ability to communicate and speak. So I feel like in school, we learn a lot of rote subjects that essentially stem from an archaic educational model that was designed for factory workers and farmers. And factory workers and farmers 150 years ago, you need them to be able to follow instructions and to execute orders. You don't need them to be critical thinkers and innovators and entrepreneurs. You just need them to do as they're told. And so largely the education system is designed for that. I mean, I think it's no coincidence that our school lunchbox looks a lot like a briefcase. And that we're used to going to school from 9 until 3, and most jobs are from 9 until 5, and you get an hour lunch break, and you report to your boss, or you sit and listen to the teacher. I mean, the parallels are endless.
Yeah.
And so I think that school is just designed to bludgeon creativity out of you for 15 years. So by the time you've gone through this, you've actually forfeited your dreams so much that you could actually just comply with being an obedient member of a larger machine until you're gray and old.
Yeah.
And it sounds a bit cynical to say it that way, but truly I believe that that's what it is. And it really takes a lot to stand up in spite of that. So what I want to say to anybody listening is, it's no small feat to say, hey, I don't mind if I don't belong. I don't mind if people ridicule me. I don't mind if I get humiliated. I don't mind if I'm laughed at. I don't mind if I'm called crazy, because you probably will be, because you are misaligned to a fundamentally flawed system. And so if everybody's trying to uphold this flawed system and you think differently, you're going to be seen as the odd one out, at least, and a threat at worst. So it is a crucible. And you have to stand in that fire, and you have to be willing to stand in that fire and let everything that isn't the true you burn away.
That was really beautifully said. I love it. Yeah, and I really appreciate sitting down and having conversations with brilliant people like you that truly understand this from a higher level and can look down at it, like almost like you're above it, to objectively see it all for what it is. Because, and I've had this conversations recently where I think, wow, like that experience I had in high school, say, was the worst experience of my life, right? But being on the outside, I was able to just observe the whole thing. I was like sitting back watching it and then understanding it, and then later on putting it all together and be like, now I understand it from a level of my own research and my own dedication to this that I never would have had if I was just constantly like super popular with groups and going off to parties and sporting events. You would never have that perspective, right? You would almost be like, wow, high school was amazing, right? We had so much fun. And then look, now I am a lawyer and I make a lot of money and I am happy, right? And they make that statement confidently, where a lot of those people are probably not happy, because I truly believe, and then this is us going down a little bit of a different approach to this. But I mean, I personally believe, really looking at every ancient text and every ancient culture, that we are spirit and soul as our heart of who we are, and we're in a physical body having a physical experience here, not the other way around. So therefore, if you were to live a life where you don't satisfy any kind of spiritual connection at all or anything, I just don't know how someone could ever really be happy. It would be like you'd be missing a huge piece of what makes you who you are. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I absolutely would. It's like you can't fill gaping spiritual voids with material possessions, no matter how big they are. You can't fill a broken heart with a new car. You can't you can't plug your childhood trauma with a house. You like it needs to you need to approach things on the plane of existence in which they exist. So a spiritual void has to be met with some kind of spiritual filler. An emotional void needs to be plugged up emotionally. And I feel like we are deeply intrinsic beings who seek belonging and community and connection and collaboration. And yet we are constantly bombarded with all of these extrinsic pursuits. Have the new iPhone, buy the latest TV, get a new car, get a new this. And that's reinforced culturally. It's reinforced through society. It's reinforced through media, through movies, through TV shows. And so everybody's on this pursuit of the external, meanwhile neglecting all of the internal things that would ultimately lead them to true happiness, fulfillment. Fulfillment, meaning fully filled. And instead you have a lot of people who are walking around empty, but garbed in fancy things on the outside.
So is that an accident? I mean, I know some would be like, you're getting down into kind of a conspiracy aspect of designing society in a certain way to keep people in a mindset that is very destructive and just as a consumer, right? Buy, conform, all these things. And that system is a very well designed system. And I guess this would be a really good place to also continue to dabble in as we go along in our conversations. But that's a system that's very destructive on the progress of humanity. It progresses things in a way where people get locked into a materialistic mindset. I mean, everybody was just raving about, the new Matrix movie that just came out, and the whole idea that the matrix of the system of designs, all the inherent things that go into that movie, really play a part in how this whole thing is woven into our mindsets here. So do you think that that's an accident? Like it just things fell into place as it went along? Or do you see that as being something that's designed to prevent us misfits from reaching those other states where we become troublemakers, right? The cog in the machine doesn't really function the same way.
Yeah. I think if anybody views this as conspiratorial, I would ask them to arrive at their own conclusions. I'm not here to tell them if it is or isn't. One thing that I can say is I feel like much of this is by design. Because if you look at society, we are the most technologically advanced we've ever been. We have the most medical breakthroughs we've ever had. We have access to the most treatments and preventative measures and cures that we've ever had. And yet, simultaneously, we live in the most sick society we ever have. We have the highest rates of cancer. We have the highest rates of heart conditions and stress levels. So we're so intelligent and we're supposedly the apex predator on this planet. Why are we suffering from dysfunctions that people who live out in tribal society, out in the forest, for example, simply don't have? They don't have obesity. They don't have crime. They don't have a lot of the degenerative conditions that we are experiencing. And I would say that's because what's taken place is an incarceration of our mind. It's prison bars we can't see. And so because we don't realize we are living in a very sophisticated form of cage, nobody tries to rebel against it. Nobody tries to break free because they don't realize that they're caged up in the first place. And you mentioned the Matrix. And when you say everybody was raving about it, I don't know who those everybody is, I kind of felt like somebody was insulting my intelligence and sort of vomiting in my eyes for 2 hours. For me, the new Matrix is like a hypocritical inside joke, because here we are during a time of lockdowns and mandates and restrictions, and you have to show a pass in most places to be able to go and see the movie, right? Which, in my opinion, is basically like you've taken the blue pill in order to be able to see a movie about taking a red pill. And it's almost like it's trying to undermine the true seeds of awakening that were inherent and implanted in the first movie. Like, people walked out of the first movie, myself included, looking at the skyline, looking at the buildings and going, oh my gosh, it's an allegory, it's an analogy for our lives. And now what they try and do in the fourth one is basically retroactively put people back to sleep and say, no, the first movie, no, that was just inside a video game. That doesn't mean anything. So now anybody who doesn't have that critical thinking, more lateral thinking mind will just dismiss all of the wisdoms, all of the hidden pearls of insight and awakening as nothing more than the product of code in a video game. And so it's a clever trick, but one that personally doesn't work on me. For me, the last movie is an abomination to everything that the first one stood for.
Yeah, and for me, I more of meant it was something that people were talking about, really. Like, oh, and it was in their mindset, right? The whole idea of the Matrix is back in our mindset, at least, right? And we could definitely have a whole conversation about our feelings on the fourth movie, but I guess we'll call it the Matrix, right? Like the first one, right? They got it right. But looking at those systems, those archetypal systems of the mind control here that have really been created, to me, I feel like you and I and so many others that are on the forefront of doing this, we're like those soldiers, like basically in that. We're trying to fight and destroy that system and reintegrate it in a new template, a new kind of way that that fosters people's imagination and creativity in a totally different way. I guess for you, what would be a better template? And you don't have to go into extreme details, but what would be a better template in some higher level ways for how us as a society could? Because I mean, I feel like we need solutions, right? A lot of people are complaining and saying, "Oh, this is such a controlled prison. This is Plato's cave, where we're all strapped and looking at shadows on the wall that aren't really there, and all these things." And I know we're complaining, but what about solutions? I mean, what kind of solutions, like feasible solutions, can you see emerging like this in the future from the actions and the things that those like us are pushing to try to change?
Yeah, ironically, I feel like a lot of the restrictions and the shakeup over the last couple of years is the catalyst for those solutions, because what it's done for a lot of people is snap them out of their slumber. It snapped them out of the daily routine enough to look at it objectively as opposed to only subjectively, right? To pull back the lens and, as you said, look at it from above like a drone's view or a bird's eye view on the situation and really go, hang on a minute, why have I been living this way? What am I chasing? Right? And I remember in the first couple of months when things went into lockdown, a lot of people who'd just been working night and day for years on end, all of a sudden had a forced holiday. And they got to discover, wait a minute, I can work remotely and I can still get my work done, but I can be sitting at home in my pajamas. And it started to create all of these new thoughts in people's minds. I remember being in Australia at the time, driving down the street and seeing so many butterflies in the road. It was like confetti at a parade. And I asked, stopped and asked one of the locals, I'm like, are there normally this many butterflies? They were like, no, we haven't seen this many butterflies for years. It's like nature started to recover itself, right? There were more dolphins all of a sudden in the oceans, and everything was replenishing. And so I think in many ways, despite a lot of the adversity and challenge that came with it, it also gave everybody a much needed breather, whether they liked it or not. And I feel like those who've been walking a personal development path for a long time, it was just a progression of everything that they've already been doing. But for a lot of people who are kind of caught up in the day-to-day grind, it was a moment of reflection and introspection. And so I think that in and of itself creates a lot of the solutions. But for my perspective personally is, if people simply did more of what they loved, if people just did more of what they loved, what they felt pulled to, rather than what they felt pushed into, right? Because to feel pulled is very different than feeling pushed. And if people just move towards what pulled them from inside, what made them come alive, the things that they love the most, they would put so much of who they truly are into it that they would find people who love what they do. So if more people did what they love, they would find people who love what they do. And when you love what you do enough where you're soothing pains and solving problems, you'll be serving people. And you'll find people who'll be happily willing to pay you for the soothing of their pains and the solving of their problems. And I think if we just allowed people to just be more of who and what they are, many of the issues would disappear almost as a byproduct. You know, I remember growing up and being told, like, you can be an engineer or a lawyer or a doctor or a teacher, and I think maybe like a fireman. Like, that was it. Yeah. And I was like, but that doesn't make sense. I don't want to be any of those things.
Yeah.
And the teacher was like, well, what do you want to be then? I was like, I just want to be me.
That's good. I like that.
And I remember saying that in school. And she was like, well, what do you mean you want to be you? I was like me now, but just bigger, just more successful, better at the things that I like doing already. And I remember that answer just, it didn't compute, you know, but imagine if we all just got to do what we loved, then you'd have the people who are architects by nature designing buildings. You'd have people who love to put their hands in the soil in charge of gardening and agriculture. You'd have people who love tech building the computer models and future algorithms and systems. And everybody would just simply be playing to their strengths because they'd be inherently opening the gifts that were given to them rather than being told what they are and what they're not. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's exactly the answer that I would give as well. But that sounds pretty awesome though, right? That sounds like really, really a beautiful path where we could progress in a way that we could even imagine. So then what is the purpose of not having that then? Is there a means of which fat cat elites at the very top can somehow make more out of this control and more monetary gain from this system than allowing the alternate? Like, I would just like to go a little bit further in that if you'd see if your opinion on that.
Yeah, for me, it's, you know, when people say like, oh, it's about the money, realize that in the upper levels of this, they can print money. So if you can print money, it's not about the money.
Yeah.
It's about control. It's about ruling. And again, you know, in the wise words of Morpheus, you know, we're born into a prison we cannot see or taste or touch. And when you can't see that you are incarcerated in any way, you don't try and fight or rebel against it. And so that way, those in power stay in power, and those in poverty stay in poverty. And then as consciousness on this planet rises, more people start stepping out of that and having the guts, because it does take courage to go against all of the dogma, to go against, you know, parental pressures and societal pressures and friends telling you you're crazy and your business will never work and your dreams don't mean anything, and who are you to think that you can make a change, and who are you to think that you can live differently, and your parents work full-time your whole life, you're going to disrespect them that way by deciding to become some singer or some dancer or something, right? Like, how dare you? And it takes a lot to stand in that. And for anybody listening, I wish there was another way, but you've just got to stand in it. And the more you do, the stronger you'll become, the more spiritual, emotional fortitude you'll develop, and then other people's opinions and judgments you'll realize are coming from largely people who don't live the way that you want to anyway. Like the people who are criticizing you are not people you would aspire to be like anyway.
Yeah.
So then how important is their opinion, and why are you letting your dreams die on the altar of their projections?
You can easily bend the limbs, but when that tree gets deep rooted and grows, if you try to bend the limb, it'll break. And so you're looking at these baby boomers, and the coding and program is so embedded in them for so many years that it's they've become rooted trees. They've grown and they've got stiff bark, and you can't really bend those limbs. They'll just snap. And a lot of them aren't ready for that information. So you have to just, I tell people who always ask me, how do I get my family members to wake up, and how do I said, you just be the light. You just do what you do. Don't put pressure on them. Every now and then you may drop a gentle seed, and that's about it. And just let them look at your life and how you're moving. Eventually they may start to ask some questions.
Right.
And then you can answer the question and walk away. Don't go too deep again. Just a little bit at baby steps, a little bit at a time. Some of them will come along, some of them may not. Just be happy that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and you're finding yourself. And then others will also see how you're moving and how you're living through this matrix. And then they will then begin to ask you questions. And some people will jump right on in with you, full blown. Some people will take time. It's a gradual process, but like you said, you can't overdo it.
Everybody's in their own game.
Exactly. Lead
That's
by
right.
example. Just lead by example. If it's not for you, it's not for you. If it's
Right.
like,
And you know them by their fruit.
Yes.
Right. Right.
It's like, did we miss that message? Like, you know people by their fruit, meaning their actions show you who they are.
Exactly.
So that whole I'm woke because you. So here it is. Let's go back. I was about to go full into that, which is, okay, you got the information, you got all this knowledge. Neo, when he went, he got into the chair, got the thing plugged into him, and he was sitting there for hours just downloading information, right? And he said, and he told Morpheus, I know Kung Fu. Morpheus said what? Show me.
Right.
Oh, right. You know. Show me.
Exactly.
Right. It's the action that proves it.
So he went in that simulation again to show him he knew Kung Fu. And what did Morpheus do? He whipped his ass.
Beat him down.
He beat him down. He's training him the whole way. Yeah, you learn some information, but you can't apply it.
Until you apply that information, it's not real. It's not in this realm. It doesn't exist. It just exists in your mind.
Yes.
Until you apply it.
Absolutely. That happens to me all the time. People